Hey, what's going on? It's Jason and Elliot. We are just chilling out talking today. It's on Friday afternoon. It's snowing where I'm at in Montana with like probably a foot of snow that we've gotten over the last day. How's the weather there and where you're at?
Perfect. I'm in Tampa, Florida. It's perfect. It's always perfect.
Yeah, awesome. So Jason and I have been chit-chatting a little bit about some of the more fun things in life. And one of the things that Jason and I both enjoy is traveling. And I for one, love traveling. Road trips are my thing. Also going international has been my thing in the past. So we thought we'd break it up a little bit today and get away from the heavier subjects that we've talked about and talk something's fun, something we enjoy doing, and getting giving you as kind of sharing a little bit more of who we are, uh, rather than just talking about the current events. So, Jason, why don't you take it away and tell us about your perspective on traveling, what you like to do with it, and go from there.
Thanks, Eliot. Yeah, I grew up in the 80s and went to college in, the early 90s. And I think my dream vacation was much different back then than it is today. Back then, if I could go to a Caribbean island or Mexico or someplace that I could just lay on the beach and drink beer and watch the sunset, that was perfect. Part of that I think was growing up in a cold place. Elliot and I are from the same place, Michigan, suburbs of Detroit. Weather was terrible. We both went to Michigan State together. Then went to law. I went to law school at University of Detroit. And after 27 years of just awful weather, I was so happy to move to Florida. So I've been in Florida for over 20 years, where, as I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, the weather is always great in Florida. So I've gotten a little bit spoiled. Eventually, after living in Florida for a while, you stop going to the beach so much,
Mm.
and life becomes routine, like most places. So now my dream vacation is much different. My dream vacation is going to Europe, and it's not just Europe. I love the country of Georgia. I've been there 5 times already. I'm going back in a couple of days. I just love everything about it. Even more specifically, the city of Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia. The people are so friendly. The food is great. I speak a little bit of Russian and I've been learning Georgian. So, with the older people who were born in the Soviet Union, I'm able to speak Russian with some of them. The younger people speak fantastic English. Their English proficiency is unbelievable. It's better than many of the countries that I visited in Western Europe. So I'm excited to get back there in a couple of days and explore Georgia more. And just a plug for my other YouTube channel, Jason in Tbilisi. If you want to check out some of my videos, please do. And don't forget to like and subscribe. So, Elliot, what would you say is your ideal vacation, and has it maybe changed over the years?
Yeah, so for me, traveling as a kid, my mom took me to places like my first air flight was when I was like 2 or 3 years old, and she was flying me all over the country to meet up with her siblings in Montana. So my uncle lived in Montana and the other uncle lived in Alaska. So my mom kind of introduced me to travel as a young baby of, doing air flight. My first solo air flight was to Phoenix, Arizona to see my dad. My parents were divorced when I was 3. And so he moved to Arizona, to Phoenix area when I was like 3 years old. So my first flight was on this plane going to Phoenix, Arizona by myself. This is 1977, so I'm probably aging myself at the moment. But it was a fun, rememberable trip because back then the stewardess would take care of you. Like they would allow single kids, to go on the flights by themselves. But I ended up sitting next to these two guys, these two old guys that are definitely like the guys from like grumpy old men. That these two were those guys,
That's
and,
funny.
and they actually offered the stewardess like, well, we're gonna take him off the plane, and the guy's like, no, we'll take care of him. We're on the same connection. we'll get him back on the plane. And it's crazy that back then the steward's like, okay, that's fine. So I'm in this terminal, or in the concourse with these two strange guys, and they take me to a bar. And they're like, "Are you hungry?" I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "All right, we'll get you a hot dog." So I got a foot long hot dog, and then and then they got me a Coke, and just hung, and they were like smoking cigars and drinking like whiskey, and so I like meeting new strange people didn't phase me as a kid, and that kind of led into my future travels. I've always been wanting to like see the world, and I was influenced by my aunt and my uncle, who live in Minnesota now. They were medical missionaries in Madagascar in the early 80s. So and actually two of my cousins were born in Madagascar. I mean, one is like 6'1", blonde hair, blue eyed. The other one is like 5'11", brown hair, brown eyed, but they love saying I was born in Madagascar because they were. So for me, my goal was to travel to Madagascar and to see the country where my cousins were born, see the country where my aunt and my because they would show me pictures and tell me stories, and I did more research of that when I was in college, and then when I got into grad school and getting involved in agricultural development and learning about agriculture in Madagascar, I'm like that would be a great place to go and do an internship. So I actually flew all the way to Madagascar in '95 with my family and was there just on a family vacation for, 2 or 3 weeks. And then in 1997, a couple of years later, I actually put in an application to be an intern for an organization in Madagascar. And so I flew back there, and I mean, it's a long flight, it's a long layover in different countries to get there, but it's an amazing place. So for me, earlier on, my motivation was to learn about cultures, to apply my anthropology degree, travel the world, see different places, meet different people, try different food. Like I'll eat anything. Now I won't because I'm a vegetarian, but back then I would eat anything. Like the Madagascar version of menudo I ate, which was intestines of the cows, and I would eat, all the seafood that they made, which was undercooked, and I got sick all the time. So experiencing those type of things and experiencing local culture, that was kind of what I was interested. Now as an older adult, I love road tripping. Like I don't care about going on planes. I don't care about going to other countries. Like I'm close enough to Canada now that I will probably road trip up there more often. But I really love road trip, and it's because of my dog. I mean, I love my dog, and leaving her more than a few days freaks me out. Like I left her for a week when I went on a business trip just about a month ago to Michigan, to our home state, where went there to the tundra and without my dog, and so that was upsetting to me. Like more than 3 days, I get really anxious with not having my dog. So partly that's the reason why that I've stuck to more road trips and local travel. So that's kind of been my change. But it's like traveling to places to go like skiing. Like I'm an avid skier, so like the next 2, 3 weeks I'm going to be in a different resort town. Next week I'm going to be in northern Idaho at Schweitzer. The weekend after that, I'm going to be in Jackson Hole in Wyoming. And so that part of traveling excites me, but it's still there's part of my old school self of learning the culture, eating the food, learning about the local people, and but just doing it, more locally on the road. So
Yeah, so I think just listening to you talk, I think there is no perfect vacation. I think it's all an individual experience, an individual journey for that person. And as we go through life, we may change our views on what the perfect vacation is based on what's going on with us. More of a personal level. So I think it's very interesting that you went to Madagascar and you had family living there. When you were there, did you see any other Americans?
so yeah, I actually stayed in a mission. Because my aunt and my uncle they went through the church, so they were medical missionaries in Madagascar. So they had connections at the local missions in different towns. They also had, connections with the hospital and doctors that they knew. And so I didn't meet so the foreigners that were at the mission when I was staying there, they were from England and Australia. So they weren't any from Americans that I saw. So for 2 months when I was in the country there, I I didn't see any Americans. It was mostly just interacting with natives or people that were coming from like Australia or Europe.
Right?
You know that for them flying over to Madagascar is less of a trip, you know, than for me to fly from America over. So there's a lot of people from Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, as well as some of the European countries that do vacation in Madagascar.
One of the things that I've been surprised about, traveling overseas over the years, and I've been privileged enough to go many places. I've been to Japan, I've been to Vietnam, been all over Western Europe, been to Central America. In my experience, I have not met a lot of Americans. In Georgia, it usually takes a couple connections to get to Georgia, and there's usually
Mhm.
only like one flight from Western Europe a week to even get there. And then once you're there, um, you don't hear people speaking English a whole lot, especially, I mean, other than the Georgians when they're speaking to you. You don't hear any American accents. And I've noticed that even in Western Europe, with the exception of England, where there's a lot of Americans, I have not seen many Americans traveling overseas. And I think part of it is probably the language. I think Americans tend not to go places where they don't speak the language. And also, I'm sure it's very expensive, to go to these places for a lot of people. And again, I've been very lucky. I think it's a interesting, discussion when it comes to travel because there is no perfect vacation for anybody. And I think we've seen this between the two of us that
Yeah.
what you consider ideal is probably different than what I consider ideal.
Yeah, the language barrier. Another story I have is when I was in I think it was 2011. I flew down to Chile by myself, not speaking a word of Spanish. And the thing is, Chileans don't speak Spanish. They speak Chilean, which is like a bastardized version of Spanish. And so even speaking Spanish to them, they wouldn't understand. It's like broken English to speak to someone. So didn't know the language, and I flew down there because I wanted to ski. So I skied at 5 different resorts in Chile. Is also the one resort on the Argentina-Chilean border. So going back to your thing about language barrier, yeah, that was a huge risk because I didn't know the local language, and actually I got in a couple problems that I ended up getting a flat tire and then trying to repair it, and I busted the jack, and I was stranded. I didn't know what to do. So I was trying to get like local auto shops to come in and fix it, and they didn't understand what I was asking. So I ended up calling the United Nations, and I called the local not the UN, the embassy. I called the U.S. embassy to have them translate for me of that I needed the tire to be fixed. And then when I returned the car, they saw that the wheel was busted and they were going to charge me money, and they wanted me to pay on the spot, which I didn't have. I didn't have cash to pay them. So again, I called the United States Embassy.
Were they helpful, the embassy?
What they were, but the same lady answered the phone and she's like, "It's you again? Are you
You're
serious?"
gonna be a regular there. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's a risk that a lot of people will take that I didn't that I, that was 14 years ago. So I was a little bit younger, but now getting in my 50s, I think taking that risk I probably wouldn't do again unless I had a translator or unless I've learned the language. Like have learned Georgian, right?
I'm working on it, but it helps.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
it definitely
definitely
helps.
helps. Definitely
Yeah.
helps.
And I tell you, just traveling has given me an appreciation for people in our own country whose native language is something other than English. I have a lot more empathy for people trying to speak our language.
Mhm.
English is a very difficult language to learn for speakers of other languages. And I really don't appreciate when some Americans say, well, if you come to our country, you need to speak English or you need to learn English. It's easy to say, but it's not so easy to do. A lot of those folks, I think, have never tried learning a foreign language. It's very difficult.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, Jason, I really enjoyed our talk about traveling, and I'm hoping that others are just as can enjoy our conversation and get to know a little bit more about us. But any final thoughts you have about traveling?
I think it's a great education. And I think if you are able to travel either domestically to a place that's different than your home or internationally to another country, you realize that we're all one human family once you start meeting people and talking to people. And our cultural differences are not so extreme that you can't find common ground.
I agree. Um, yeah, so thanks, Jason, and hope everyone has a great Friday, and we'll get this up on YouTube shortly. Thank you very much.
Everyone later. Bye bye.
Bye.